Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Easy English Spark channel. I'm so happy you're here today. If you're ready to level up your English listening and speaking skills, you're in the right place. Today, we're diving into a thrilling story that will not only boost your English, but also spark your imagination. We'll follow the journey of Clara Miller, an ordinary woman caught in an extraordinary situation, fighting for what's rightfully hers, from a stolen lottery ticket to a fierce battle for justice. Along the way, we'll sharpen our listening, speaking, and storytelling skills together. Let's get started and light up your English journey. Chapter 1: A Quiet Afternoon. It was a calm and peaceful Saturday afternoon in the small, quiet town of Willowbrook. The kind of afternoon where time seemed to slow down, where nothing in particular was happening, but everything felt just right. The streets were empty, and the sun hung lazily in the sky, casting a soft golden light over the town. A perfect day, really. The kind of day that made you feel like you had all the time in the world to do whatever you wanted. In the heart of this town, there was a small shoe shop, the kind that didn't attract much attention but had a charm of its own. It had the kind of shopkeeper who remembered your name after just a few visits, and who always had a friendly smile on their face. Clara Miller, a woman in her early 70s, was emerging from this shop now, carrying a small brown bag in her hand. Inside the bag, she held a pair of shoes, new shoes that she had just bought. Clara wasn't the kind of person to splurge on expensive things. In fact, she rarely treated herself. She was on a tight budget, living alone since her husband had passed away many years ago. Her life was simple, and she was content with the little joys it offered. Today, these shoes were a special treat. They weren't fancy by any means, but they were comfortable and, more importantly, affordable. She had spent hours walking around the small town, trying to find something that fit her modest budget, and she had finally found them. As she walked down the street with the shoes in her hand, Clara couldn't help but smile to herself. She had been saving up for weeks to buy something nice, and these shoes seemed like the perfect reward for her patience. A nice cup of tea when I get home, she thought, and then I can take a walk in my new shoes. Life's little pleasures. The town was as quiet as ever. The occasional breeze rustled the leaves of the trees, and the sound of birds singing in the Yasi distance was the only noise that filled the air. Clara loved this about her town. It was small, peaceful, and safe. She could walk through the streets without worry, knowing that everyone was friendly and that nothing much ever happened here. She continued walking, her shoes gently tapping the pavement as she made her way home. She thought about how she would spend the afternoon. Maybe read a book or watch some old movies on the television. The day was hers to enjoy, and she looked forward to the small, simple pleasures that came with it. But then, just as she was about to pass the corner of the street, she heard something behind her. At first, she thought it was just the sound of footsteps from another pedestrian, but the sound grew closer, and before she could even turn around, a sharp movement startled her. Suddenly, a figure dashed toward her from behind. What on earth? Clara thought, her heart racing. She didn't have time to react. The figure, a young man, reached her in an instant, and before she could even raise her arms in defense, she felt a sharp blow to her head. Her vision blurred for a moment, and the world seemed to spin around her. Then, just like that, the man snatched her bag from her hands. She was too stunned to fully comprehend what was happening. She fell backward, landing hard on the cold pavement. The man stood over her for a brief second, looking down at her. His face was shadowed by the bright afternoon sun, but Clara could make out the outline of a tall figure with wild, unkempt hair. And then, as quickly as he had appeared, the young man turned and ran. "Help! Help!" Clara screamed, but her voice seemed to vanish into the quiet of the empty street. No one came to her aid. No one was around to witness the crime. It was as though she was alone in the world. For a moment, Clara lay on the ground, dazed and confused. She felt the back of her head where the man had struck her, a sharp pain radiating through her skull. Slowly, she sat up, her heart pounding in her chest. Her hands trembled as she reached for her bag, but it was gone. The thief had taken it. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of the situation. What just happened? She wondered, her thoughts muddled by the shock of the attack. She couldn't believe it. In all her years, she had never experienced anything like this. How could this have happened in her quiet town, on a peaceful afternoon? She pushed herself up, feeling unsteady on her feet. Her head spun, and her legs felt weak, but she knew she had to get help. I need to find someone, Clara thought. She took a few unsteady steps, her breath shallow and quick. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her as she walked toward the nearest house, hoping someone would be home. At that moment, everything she had taken for granted about her peaceful life seemed to be slipping away. The world, that once felt safe and predictable, now felt like a place full of dangers she had never imagined. As Clara approached the house, her thoughts were clouded with confusion and fear. But she had no choice but to press on, hoping that someone, anyone, would be there to help her in her time of need. Chapter 2. The unexpected attack. Clara's heart was still pounding from the sudden jolt, and her mind was struggling to catch up with the events that had just unfolded. For a moment, she simply sat there on the cold pavement, her hands pressed against the ground to steady herself. The world felt distant, as though she was trapped inside a dream, unable to fully understand the reality of what had just happened. Her head throbbed where she had been struck, and she could feel the sticky warmth of blood starting to form at the back of her scalp. She wiped her hand across her forehead, unsure if she was dizzy from the impact or from the shock that still hadn't fully settled in. How could this happen? She thought, blinking rapidly, trying to clear her vision. It wasn't just the pain that stunned her. It was the overwhelming confusion of it all. I've lived in this town for years. Nothing ever happens here. How could someone do this to me? Her hands were trembling, not from the physical injury, but from the terror of being attacked out of nowhere. She was alone. There was nobody around to help her. The street was empty, eerily still. Not a single person had come to her aid. Not a single car had passed by. It was like the town had disappeared, leaving her in this vulnerable, isolated moment. She looked around, half expecting someone to step out of a nearby building, but no one appeared. The peaceful town she had once trusted felt like an alien place, distant and unfriendly. Suddenly, Clara remembered the bag, the one the thief had grabbed from her hands. My purse! My ticket! My shoes! The thoughts flashed through her mind like a wave crashing in slow motion. The bag contained the new shoes she had just bought, but more importantly, it contained the lottery ticket, the one with the numbers that had been important to her for years. She had held on to that ticket for months, always hopeful that this time, this week, she might win. And now, that small piece of hope was gone, snatched away by a young man with no regard for her or what she held dear. A wave of panic surged through her chest. The ticket had been a part of her life. She had bought it every week for as long as she could remember. The numbers were significant to her. They were tied to her memories, her family, her history. I can't let it go. I can't lose it, she thought, her mind racing as the panic deepened. With trembling hands, she slowly stood up. The pain in her head made her dizzy, but she forced herself to focus. She couldn't stay on the ground. She couldn't just let him get away with it. I have to find help. I have to get my bag back, she told herself, her voice shaking but determined. Clara took a few unsteady steps, each one feeling like an eternity. Her legs felt weak, her movements slow and labored, but she pushed through. She looked around again, but there was no one in sight. It was like the town had disappeared along with the thief. Why is no one here? Where is everybody? She wondered, her heart pounding even harder in her chest. As she moved down the street, her thoughts kept circling back to the man who had attacked her. She hadn't seen much of his face, only a brief glimpse when he was standing over her. But what she did see stayed with her. His wild, dark hair, his tall figure, his quick movements. Was he young? Was he desperate? Why did he choose me? The questions echoed in her mind, unanswered. She could still hear his footsteps in her ears, the sound of his hurried escape as he ran away with her things, the sound of his rapid breathing, the slight crunch of his shoes on the pavement as he fled into the emptiness. But after that, silence. Absolute silence. Clara turned the corner and headed toward a nearby house. She could see the faint outline of a front door, the promise of help within. Please let someone be home, she thought. Please, I can't do this alone. The house was small, and the garden was well kept, a sign that someone still lived here. She approached the door slowly, her heart still racing. Her hand reached for the doorbell, but before she could press it, the door opened slightly. A woman appeared, a kind face framed by soft gray hair, her eyes wide with concern. "Oh my goodness, are you okay?" the woman asked, seeing Clara's disheveled appearance. Her hand pressed against her head, her eyes wide with fear. Clara didn't even have to speak. The woman immediately stepped aside, pulling Clara into the warmth of her home. Come in, let me help you," she said, guiding Clara gently toward a chair. Clara collapsed into the chair, exhausted. "I've been robbed," she said, hoarsely, her voice shaky. "He took my bag and my lottery ticket." The woman's face softened with sympathy. "A robbery? My dear, that's awful," she said, her voice full of concern. "Sit here. I'll call the ambulance right away. You need medical attention." Clara nodded weakly, feeling both grateful and overwhelmed. The woman hurried to the phone, dialing the emergency services. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her breathing, trying to calm the racing thoughts in her mind. But nothing could shake the feeling of vulnerability that had settled deep inside her. Nothing would ever feel the same again. The thief had stolen more than just her bag. He had stolen her sense of security, her peace of mind. And now, Clara realized, her journey to reclaim her life, her stolen ticket, had just begun. Chapter 3. The Hospital Visit. As Clara sat in the woman's cozy living room, her head throbbing and her heart still racing from the shock of the attack, she felt a deep sense of relief knowing that someone had helped her. The kind woman, who had introduced herself as Mrs. Thompson, made Clara feel safe, offering her tea and reassuring words. The warmth of the house was a stark contrast to the cold, empty street she had just come from, and Clara felt a sense of comfort in the small, familiar setting. But despite the comfort, Clara knew she wasn't okay. Her head ached terribly, and her mind was clouded with confusion. Her stomach churned with a mix of anxiety and fear as she replayed the events over and over again in her mind. How could this happen? Who would do such a thing? She wondered, her thoughts spiraling. And yet, deep down, she knew that she couldn't change what had happened. Mrs. Thompson had made the call to the ambulance, and Clara now heard the faint sound of sirens approaching in the distance. As she sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, she looked out the window, but the peace of the moment couldn't erase the feeling of unease that had settled in her chest. Before long, the paramedics arrived. Two men, both in their early 30s, rushed inside the house, carrying medical bags and immediately springing into action. They had been briefed on Clara's condition over the phone, and as they took in the sight of her, they quickly assessed her injuries. One of the paramedics, a tall man with dark hair, kneeled down beside her. He looked at Clara with a calm, practiced demeanor, asking her a few questions to gauge her level of alertness. "Mrs. Miller, how are you feeling right now?" he asked gently, his voice soothing. Clara blinked and looked at him. "My head hurts," she said quietly, her voice strained. "I feel dizzy, and I can't think straight. I don't know what happened." The paramedic nodded understandingly. "You've had a blow to the head. It's normal to feel a bit confused and lightheaded. We're going to get you checked out at the hospital, all right? Just to make sure you're okay." Clara nodded slowly, feeling too weak to argue. She didn't want to go to the hospital, but she knew she had no choice. The dizziness in her head and the pain were too much to ignore. The other paramedic, a shorter man with a scruffy beard, lifted her gently to her feet, supporting her as she stood up. Clara winced, her body still aching from the fall. She had hoped she could make it through the day without any further issues, but now she was facing something much more serious. "It'll be okay, Mrs. Miller," the first paramedic reassured her as they slowly guided her outside to the ambulance waiting on the street. "We're going to take good care of you." Clara felt a small sense of comfort in his words. As they made their way to the ambulance, she was careful not to look around too much. The memory of the attack, the fear, the pain, the helplessness was still fresh in her mind, and she didn't want to be reminded of it. Inside the ambulance, the paramedic settled her onto the stretcher, and Clara felt the vehicle jolt slightly as it began its journey toward the hospital. The city lights blurred outside the windows, and Clara's thoughts were consumed by what had happened. What's going to happen now? She thought. What if I never get my things back? What if I never see that lottery ticket again? The paramedics continued to monitor her condition, checking her vitals and asking her questions to keep her alert. As they reached the hospital, Clara was carefully transferred onto a bed and wheeled inside. The bright fluorescent lights in the hospital corridor were a stark contrast to the soft, peaceful glow of her own home. Inside the emergency room, Clara was immediately seen by a doctor, Dr. Sarah Edwards, a woman in her 40s with dark, curly hair tied back in a neat bun. Dr. Edwards wasted no time, examining Clara's head injury and asking her about her symptoms. Clara explained that she had been struck on the head during a robbery. She could barely remember the details, only that the thief had grabbed her bag and fled. "You're lucky," Dr. Edwards said after a moment, her expression softening. "The injury doesn't appear to be too severe, but we'll run some tests to be sure." "It's good you came in when you did." Clara nodded weakly, still feeling the effects of the blow. "I don't know what to do. I feel so lost," she murmured, her eyes downcast. The doctor took her hand gently and gave it a reassuring squeeze. "You're going to be just fine. We'll take care of you. Just try to relax. You're in good hands." Dr. Edwards paused before continuing. "How are you feeling otherwise?" Clara hesitated for a moment. Her head was still throbbing, but the worst of it had settled into a dull ache. She tried to focus on the doctor's words. "I feel shaken," Clara admitted, "and scared. I don't know what's going to happen now. I don't know what to do about my bag or my lottery ticket. That was all I had left of any value." Dr. Edwards gave her a sympathetic look. "I understand. Losing something like that can feel like you've lost a part of yourself. But we'll take care of you, one thing at a time." At that moment, one of the nurses came in, holding a small chart with Clara's details on it. She approached the doctor and handed it over. "The tests are ready. We'll check everything, but I think it's safe to say that you should take it easy for a few days. No heavy lifting or sudden movements, especially since you've suffered a blow to the head." Clara nodded again, grateful for the doctor's care. "Will I be okay to go home soon?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. Dr. Edwards smiled reassuringly. "We'll keep you here overnight, just for observation. It's important we monitor your recovery. We want to make sure there are no complications. We'll keep you comfortable, don't worry." Clara felt a bit of relief hearing those words. It wasn't exactly what she had wanted, but it felt good to know that she was being looked after. "Thank you," she said quietly, feeling a little less alone in the sterile, bustling environment of the hospital. As the nurse left to prepare Clara's room, the doctor patted her hand gently. "You rest now, okay? You're in good hands. Clara, everything's going to be all right." Clara nodded, her eyelids growing heavy. For the first time in hours, she allowed herself to relax, letting the exhaustion of the day pull her into a fitful sleep. But as she drifted off, a thought lingered in the back of her mind. What about my ticket? What about my bag? What happens next? And with that, Clara's journey to find justice and reclaim what had been taken from her was just beginning. Chapter 4. A Frantic Thief. While Clara was being taken care of in the hospital, the thief, Ryan Brooks, was at home, alone in his cramped apartment. His mind was racing. His pulse was still quick from the adrenaline of the robbery. But now, as the silence of his small living space pressed in around him, the reality of what he had just done began to sink in. Ryan was sitting at a rickety wooden table in his dimly lit apartment, one hand drumming nervously on the surface. The other hand, still gripping the stolen bag, sat in front of him. It was a plain old thing, nothing special, certainly not worth much. The old woman had nothing in it except a little cash, and he assumed something else that had been of no use to her. His thoughts swirled around the robbery, the brief moment when he had grabbed her bag, her cry for help echoing in his ears. What did I do? What did I get myself into? Ryan thought, running a hand through his unkempt hair, his eyes darting around the room as though he was expecting someone to burst in at any moment. He felt jittery, on edge, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. But, as he looked at the bag again, something caught his eye. The lottery ticket. It had slipped out from one of the bag's compartments, and he had almost missed it. It was crumpled but intact, a simple piece of paper with a few numbers scrawled across it. Ryan picked it up, studying it with curiosity. This is useless to her, he thought. She's an old woman. She won't care about a lottery ticket. He tossed the bag aside, focusing entirely on the ticket now. He had seen these lottery tickets around before. People bought them all the time, dreaming of winning big. Maybe I'll give it a shot, he thought. What have I got to lose? I can check the numbers later. But first, I need to make sure no one saw me. He stood up abruptly, his thoughts scattered. He moved to the window, peeking through the thin curtains to scan the street below. The street was empty, as it had been when he'd struck. The coast seemed clear, but the unease in his chest wouldn't go away. His breathing quickened, his mind still spinning with the act he had just committed. Ryan was no stranger to petty theft. It was something he had done for years, stolen from stores, cars, and sometimes from people too. But this was different. This felt like a turning point, though he couldn't quite explain why. Was it the fact that he had hurt someone? That he had attacked an old woman in broad daylight? Or maybe it was the thought of the lottery ticket, a small but potentially life-changing prize that lingered in the back of his mind. He felt his stomach tighten with a mix of excitement and dread. What if it's worth something? He thought. What if it's a winning ticket? I could really use that money. Without thinking too much, he shoved the crumpled ticket into his pocket. The bag, now abandoned on the floor, held no more interest for him. It was just another piece of junk, something he had stolen for no reason other than to grab what he could. The money wasn't enough to make it worth keeping, but the ticket could be something special. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It was almost evening. The rest of the world was probably going about their business, unaware of the crime that had just taken place. But Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that it would all catch up to him. What if the police come knocking? He wondered, his heart racing again. What if she calls the cops? What if someone saw me? His thoughts quickly spiraled. The excitement over the ticket was slowly giving way to the fear of being caught. He needed to calm down, he told himself. He had to get out of his head for a while. I'll check the numbers first, Ryan muttered, standing up from the table. His hands were still shaking as he rifled through the clutter on his counter, looking for the local newspaper. The lottery. Numbers were usually printed in the back. When he found the newspaper, he quickly unfolded it, scanning the page for the numbers. His breath caught in his throat as he found them, the winning numbers. Ryan's eyes widened in disbelief. He had seen those numbers before, somewhere. But where? It took a moment for the realization to hit him. Those were the same numbers on the ticket he had stolen. No way, he whispered to himself, a grin slowly spreading across his face. I've got the winning ticket. This is it. I can't believe it. I'm rich. Ryan sat back down at the table, his hands trembling as he spread out the ticket. His heart was racing with excitement now, all the fear and anxiety melting away. He checked the numbers over and over again, almost in disbelief. 5, 12, 23, 24, 38, 41. They were a perfect match to the winning combination printed in the newspaper. He laughed nervously, staring at the ticket as though it might disappear before his eyes. I can't believe this. This is my ticket, my chance to get out of this miserable life, he thought, as a wave of excitement washed over him. For the first time in a long while, he could see a way out. He could escape from the dead-end job, from the apartment he could barely afford, from the miserable cycle of his existence. Ryan sat there for a while, imagining all the things he could do with the money, what car he would buy, where he would go. He even fantasized about leaving the small town behind, starting over in a big city where no one knew him. But as his mind raced with possibilities, a dark thought crept in. What if someone finds out? What if they trace the ticket back to the woman I robbed? The idea of getting caught made his stomach turn. I've got to keep this quiet. No one can know. I've got to stay calm, he muttered to himself, trying to quell the anxiety that threatened to boil over. The evening passed, and the more Ryan thought about it, the more paranoid he became. He tried to focus on the excitement of his win, but he couldn't shake the fear that the police might come knocking any minute. He had no idea where the woman lived or who she was, but he couldn't stop thinking about her bag, about the robbery. As the night wore on, he realized he had to act fast. I need to get to the lottery office and claim this prize. I need to get rid of everything, ditch the bag, get rid of anything that could tie me to this crime, Ryan thought. I'll be careful. I'll be smart about this. But deep down, despite the thrill of winning, Ryan knew he couldn't outrun his past. His mistakes were beginning to catch up with him, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. Chapter 5. A Winning Ticket. As the night settled in, Ryan Brooks couldn't shake the feeling of exhilaration that had consumed him since he realized the lottery ticket he'd stolen was a winner. Every time he glanced at the crumpled piece of paper in his pocket, his heart raced faster. The numbers were burned into his mind, almost like they were meant for him. 5, 12, 23, 24, 38, 41. These were no longer just random numbers. They were his ticket to a new life. Ryan had never been one for the lottery, but tonight it felt like fate had stepped in and given him a break. He'd spent so many years stuck in a routine that never led anywhere. Endless, dead-end jobs, struggling with bills, living in a tiny, run-down apartment that barely felt like home. The thought of actually having something real, something valuable, was intoxicating. He pulled the ticket out of his jacket pocket again, staring at it as if it were a rare artifact. "I can't believe it," he whispered to himself, unable to suppress a grin. "I'm going to be rich. This is it. This is my chance to change everything." The weight of the ticket in his hand was heavy with promise. "What should I do first?" he thought, as he sat back in his chair, his fingers still tracing the edges of the ticket. The possibilities flooded his mind. He could buy a new car, something sleek and expensive. Maybe a house, one with more space, something nicer. The idea of escaping his current life, of leaving behind the small town that had become his prison, felt so close now. Maybe he could even move to a big city, someplace where no one knew him, where he could start fresh. Ryan's thoughts were interrupted by the distant sound of sirens. The flashing lights of police cars passing through the streets outside seemed to intensify the mounting tension inside him. For a brief moment, the excitement of his good fortune was overshadowed by fear. "What if they're coming for me?" he wondered, panic creeping into his chest. But then, just as quickly, the rational part of his mind took over, and he reminded himself that there was no reason for anyone to know he had done anything wrong. He'd been careful. He'd taken the woman's bag when no one was around. No one had seen him. And the ticket, well, the ticket was his now. There was nothing to worry about. The sirens faded, and Ryan leaned back in his chair again, letting out a long breath. No turning back now, he thought. He pulled out his phone and opened the local news website to check the latest lottery results, just to double-check the numbers. As the page loaded, his eyes scanned the screen with growing anticipation. His heart skipped a beat when he saw the announcement. This week's winning lottery numbers are 5, 12, 23, 24, 38, 41. He couldn't believe it. He had the ticket. It was the same set of numbers, the same combination of digits that now promised him a fortune. "I'm rich," Ryan said aloud, the words tasting strange in his mouth. He laughed to himself, disbelief still hanging in the air. But there was no time to waste. He had to claim the prize, and he had to do it quickly. The longer he waited, the more likely someone might find out that the ticket was stolen. He needed to act fast. Ryan scrambled to his feet, his mind racing with plans. "I need to go to the lottery office," he muttered, pacing around the room. He wasn't sure what the process was, but he knew that claiming the prize would be his ticket out of this life. He had to be smart about it. He couldn't draw attention to himself. He grabbed his jacket, stuffed the ticket back into his pocket, and headed out the door. The streets outside were dimly lit, and the evening air felt cool against his skin. As he walked, his thoughts raced. He kept thinking about what he would do with the money, how he would leave this life behind. He had never felt this excited, this alive. It was like everything he had ever wanted was now within reach. But there was a lingering thought at the back of his mind, a nagging doubt he couldn't shake. What if they find out? What if they figure out the ticket was stolen? Ryan's grip tightened around his jacket as the fear gnawed at him. The more he thought about it, the more paranoid he became. But then he remembered the small details. The fact that Clara, the old woman he had robbed, probably wouldn't even realize what was missing for some time. She hadn't seemed to care much about the ticket when she was being attacked, and even if she had, how would she prove it was hers? After all, there were no names on the ticket. He quickened his pace. I just need to get to the office, get the money, and disappear, he thought, pushing the doubts aside. Ryan finally arrived at the small lottery office at the end of the street. The lights inside were still on, and he could see a few people milling around inside, filling out their forms for the next lottery. It felt like the calm before the storm. Ryan stepped inside, trying to keep his demeanor casual, but his heart was pounding in his chest. He walked up to the counter where a middle-aged woman with short, dark hair was sitting. She looked up from her paperwork and smiled at him. "How can I help you?" she asked politely. Ryan swallowed hard, trying to sound confident. "I've got the winning ticket," he said, sliding it across the counter toward her. The woman glanced at the ticket, then back at Ryan, her expression unchanged. "Let me check that for you," she said, picking it up and scanning it into the system. Ryan watched her fingers type away on the keyboard, his pulse quickening with each second that passed. He could feel the weight of the ticket in his pocket, his only chance at escaping everything he had ever known. After what felt like an eternity, the woman looked up at him with a small, tight-lipped smile. "Congratulations," she said. "You're the lucky winner." Ryan's breath caught in his throat. "It's really mine?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. His mind was racing as the reality of his situation set in. "Yes, sir. You've won £5 million, the woman said, still smiling. "Just a moment. I'll get the paperwork started for you to claim your prize." Ryan barely heard her as he stood there, stunned. £5 million. The words echoed in his mind, but even as the excitement swelled inside him, a small voice at the back of his head kept whispering, "What have you done? What have you really won?" Chapter 6. The Police Investigation. The following morning, the quiet town of Willowbrook was shaken by the news of the robbery. It wasn't often that anything remotely criminal happened in a place so small and seemingly peaceful. But Clara Miller's attack had changed that. The entire town was talking about it. Whispers on every street corner, in every cafe, and even among the shopkeepers who had known Clara for years. The peaceful calm of Willowbrook had been disrupted, and now it was up to Detective Mark Lawson to find the person responsible. Detective Lawson was a man in his late 30s, tall and lean, with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He had been in the force for nearly a decade and had seen his fair share of cases, but something about this one felt different. Perhaps it was the fact that Clara was well known in the town. Everyone knew her, respected her. Or maybe it was the fact that the crime had been so brazen. An elderly woman, attacked in broad daylight, robbed in the middle of a quiet street. It was rare for a crime like this to happen in Willowbrook, and that made it all the more alarming. Lawson arrived at the hospital that morning, determined to get to the bottom of the situation. Clara was recovering, still shaken but physically stable. The doctors had assured her that the blow to her head wasn't as severe as it had first seemed, but she was still in need of rest. As Lawson entered her room, he found her sitting in bed, a cup of tea on the table beside her, her hands folded in her lap. She looked up when he walked in, her eyes tired but grateful. "Mrs. Miller, I'm Detective Lawson," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I'm here to talk to you about the robbery. I know you've been through a lot, but I need to ask you a few questions to help with the investigation." Clara nodded slowly, still feeling a bit off from the incident, but determined to help in any way she could. "Of course, Detective. I'll do whatever I can," she replied, her voice soft but steady. Lawson sat down beside her bed, pulling out a small notepad and a pen. "I understand this is difficult, but if you could just walk me through what happened, anything you remember will be helpful." Clara took a deep breath and then began to recount the events. "I was walking home, just a normal day. I had bought a new pair of shoes. I was feeling good, thinking about making some tea when I got home and maybe going for a walk in the park. It was so quiet. I remember thinking that everything felt peaceful. And then I heard someone behind me. I didn't think much of it at first. I thought it was just someone passing by." Her voice quivered slightly as she remembered the moment. But then I felt a sudden force, a sharp blow to the back of my head. I didn't have time to turn around. He grabbed my bag, and before I knew it, I was on the ground. Detective Lawson listened closely, scribbling notes as Clara spoke. He could hear the fear in her voice even now as she recounted the attack. I know this is difficult, but try to think back. Can you remember anything about the man who attacked you? Did you see his face? Anything at all? Clara paused, her brows furrowing in concentration. I didn't get a good look at his face, but I remember he was tall, and he had messy brown hair. It was kind of long, dirty looking. He wasn't wearing anything special, just a jacket, maybe a shirt underneath. I think it was white with something on it, maybe a logo or a design. I can't remember exactly. But I do remember his eyes. He had dark eyes. I saw them for a moment when he was standing over me. He looked down at me, just for a second. I saw his face clearly for that brief moment. Lawson nodded, making a note of the description. Okay, that's helpful. Anything else? Anything about his clothes, his voice, his mannerisms? Clara thought for a moment. No, not really. I was in shock. It all happened so fast. The next thing I knew, he was running off with my bag. I called for help, but no one came. And then I just got up and went to the nearest house. They helped me. And now I'm here, she finished, her voice trailing off. Detective Lawson set his pen down, his face thoughtful. All right, Mrs. Miller, thank you. You've been very helpful. We'll keep working on this. He gave her a reassuring smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. He could tell that she was still rattled, but he also knew that her account was the key to finding the thief. He had a feeling that something wasn't adding up, but he couldn't put his finger on it just yet. Before he left, he stood up and gave Clara one last look. One more thing, Mrs. Miller, he said. You mentioned a bag. Did you have anything important in it besides the shoes? Clara nodded. Yes, there was my lottery ticket. I buy one every week. I always use the same numbers. She paused, her face clouding with worry. I've had those numbers for years. I don't know why, but they've always felt lucky to me. The mention of the lottery ticket piqued Lawson's interest. Can you tell me the numbers? He asked, pulling out his notepad again. Clara recited the numbers. 5, 12, 23, 24, 38, 41. She said them slowly, as if saying them out loud made them even more important than they already were. Thank you, Detective Lawson said, jotting them down in his notes. He had a feeling that the lottery ticket was more significant than Clara realized. Later that day, Lawson met with his team at the station to discuss the case. They had already reviewed the scene of the crime, but nothing stood out. The street had been empty, and no one had seen anything. It was clear that the thief had planned this carefully. But why pick Clara? What was his motive? One of the officers, Officer Sarah Mitchell, was the first to speak up. "We've already canvassed the area, but there's still no sign of the suspect. We don't have a lot to go on. No witnesses and the bag's gone. We might not even be able to recover the ticket." Detective Lawson thought for a moment. It's strange, isn't it? He went after her, grabbed her bag, and ran off. But if he wanted money, why didn't he take more? Why would he leave something like a lottery ticket in a bag he'd stolen? From an old woman? Officer Mitchell nodded. That's what doesn't add up. It's almost as if he didn't know what he was taking. Lawson's mind raced. What if it wasn't just about the money? He turned to Officer Mitchell. We need to track down that lottery ticket. That's where our answers lie. With that, the investigation shifted. Detective Lawson knew that the lottery ticket held the key to everything. If they could trace it back to the thief, they could finally catch him. He also knew that it wasn't going to be easy, but it was a lead, and it was the best they had. The clock was ticking, and Lawson was determined to find the thief before he could disappear into the shadows. Chapter 7. Ryan's Success and Desperation. As the days passed, Ryan Brooks found himself increasingly consumed by the winning lottery ticket he had stolen from Clara Miller. What had initially felt like a brief moment of luck, snatching the bag from an elderly woman, was beginning to feel like the turning point of his life. And yet, the excitement of his good fortune quickly began to spiral into desperation. For the first time, Ryan truly felt like he was on the edge of something bigger than himself. He had always been stuck in the cycle of small-time thefts, stealing. From stores, cars, the occasional wallet here and there. But this was different. This wasn't just petty crime. This was a life-changing amount of money, enough to give him a future, a chance to escape the drudgery of his current life. 5 million pounds. The idea was intoxicating. He had been careful. Too careful, really. He had spent the last few days hiding in his apartment, not daring to go out in case someone recognized him or the police came knocking. He hadn't even claimed the prize yet. He couldn't risk it. He had checked and rechecked the numbers on the ticket, making sure it was a perfect match. But still, the fear of getting caught gnawed at him every moment. Ryan had been pacing his small, cluttered living room for hours. His nerves were shot. The ticket sat on the coffee table in front of him, almost taunting him with its potential. But still, the reality of what he had done was weighing on him. What if someone sees me? What if they know it was stolen? Those thoughts had been looping in his mind for days, feeding his growing paranoia. The more Ryan thought about it, the more he realized how easily everything could go wrong. It was a small town, and people were starting to talk about Clara's robbery. He had seen the news coverage. He had heard the whispers on the street. Detective Lawson was asking questions. It was only a matter of time before they connected him to the crime. What if they find out it was me? His heart raced just thinking about it. He looked at the ticket again. £5 million. It's mine. It's all mine, he whispered to himself, trying to convince himself that it was real. But the excitement had faded. Now, all he could feel was fear. Fear that someone would come to his door. Fear that the police were already on his trail. Fear that the whole thing would unravel before he could even claim the prize. Ryan had spent the entire morning sitting by the window, watching for any signs of movement in the street below. He had been hoping to see some sign of normalcy, maybe a few people walking by, a few cars passing, but instead, the street remained eerily quiet. The silence only heightened his anxiety. What if they're already looking for me? He thought. Again, the words echoing in his mind. But then, just as he was about to lose himself to panic, he heard a noise, a car door slamming shut. Ryan jumped up, rushing to the window. His heart leaped into his throat when he saw a police car parked across the street. 2 officers were standing outside talking to a neighbor. No, 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 Ryan muttered under his breath, backing away from the window. They're here. They know. They've found out. His hands began to shake as his mind raced. He couldn't stay here. He couldn't wait around for the police to come for him. The weight of the ticket, of his crime, felt heavier now. The euphoria of his potential windfall had been replaced by a deep, suffocating anxiety. Ryan grabbed the ticket and stuffed it into the pocket of his jacket. He paced back and forth, running through possible scenarios in his head. I need to get out. I need to leave town. I need to claim the prize before they find me. But how? Where could he go? How could he possibly escape? He felt trapped. Every move he made, every second that ticked by, seemed to bring him closer to getting caught. What if it's already too late? The thought sent a shiver down his spine. What if the ticket doesn't even matter? In a panic, Ryan grabbed his jacket and rushed out the door. He couldn't stay in his apartment any longer. He had to do something. He had to act. I'll claim the prize today. I'll do it before they come for me, he thought, barely able to keep his thoughts straight. But the moment he stepped outside, the world felt different. The familiar streets of Willowbrook, the ones he had passed 1,000 times without a second thought, now felt suffocating. It was as if every corner he turned held a threat. Is someone watching me? Are the police already following me? The questions raked through his mind as he made his way to the bus station, hoping to get out of town and to the lottery office as quickly as possible. He couldn't risk driving. He couldn't risk drawing attention to himself. He boarded the bus, his eyes darting nervously around. He checked over his shoulder, half expecting someone to be following him, but no one seemed to be paying attention. Still, his paranoia clung to him like a shadow. As the bus rumbled along, Ryan couldn't help but replay the robbery in his mind. He thought about Clara, how she had looked when he'd attacked her, her shock and confusion as he snatched the bag from her hands. She probably doesn't even know it's gone yet, he thought, trying to reassure himself. But deep down, he knew that the police were going to find out. They always did. The bus finally pulled into the station, and Ryan's heart skipped a beat when he saw the lottery office in the distance. It looked small from the outside, just like he remembered it. He walked quickly, forcing himself to focus on the task ahead. He could feel his pulse pounding in his ears, and the weight of the ticket in his pocket felt heavier than ever. He stepped into the office, and the bell above the door jingled as he entered. The clerk behind the counter looked up at him with a polite smile. "How can I help you today?" she asked. Ryan tried to sound casual, tried to hide the desperation in his voice. "I've got a winning ticket," he said, sliding it across the counter with shaky hands. The clerk took the ticket, her smile never fading. "Let me just check this for you." Ryan stood there, staring at the ticket, his throat dry as he waited. The seconds felt like hours as the clerk scanned it into the system. His heart raced, his palms were sweating, and his breathing was shallow. "This is it. This is my chance," he thought, the words swirling in his mind. Finally, the clerk looked up at him with a smile. "Congratulations, you've won," she said. £5 million. That's a lot of money. We'll get the paperwork started. For you." Ryan's stomach flipped. He couldn't believe it. He was on the verge of becoming a rich man. The life he had dreamed about, the escape from everything, was within his grasp. But the fear, His growing fear that everything could come crashing down at any moment was still there, lurking in the background. As the clerk handed him the form to fill out, Ryan suddenly felt a wave of dizziness. "I've won, but at what cost?" The question echoed in his mind as he signed his name on the dotted line, realizing that no matter what, he couldn't escape the consequences of his actions. Chapter 8. Clara's Realization. The days that followed Clara's attack were a blur. She had spent most of her time resting at the hospital, recovering from the blow to her head, but also grappling with a deep, gnawing feeling of helplessness. The peaceful routine of her life had been shattered, replaced by confusion and uncertainty. The images of the man who had attacked her played over and over in her mind, a constant reminder of the violence she had experienced. But despite the physical pain, it was the emotional toll that weighed most heavily on her. She had spent so many years living a quiet, unremarkable life. A life that now seemed so far away. The robbery had left her with nothing more than the scars of the attack, both physical and emotional. Her new shoes, her little indulgence, seemed trivial now in the wake of everything that had happened. But one thing remained in her mind. Something that lingered, something that wouldn't let her go. The lottery ticket. Clara had been purchasing that same lottery ticket every week for years. She wasn't obsessed with it, but she had always felt that somehow those numbers were special. 5, 12, 23, 24, 38, 41. The numbers had meaning to her, each one tied to a significant moment in her life. Her birth date, her childhood home, the age of her son, Simon, who now lived in Australia. Every number told a part of her story. Every week, she held on to that ticket, clinging to the small hope that one day it might change everything. But now, that ticket was gone, stolen, taken from her by the thief who had attacked her. For the first few days, Clara had been too shaken to think clearly. She had been in pain, disoriented, and overwhelmed by the sudden change in her life. But as the days passed and she started to feel physically better, something else began to stir inside her. A thought, a nagging suspicion that she couldn't shake, kept circling in her mind. It wasn't until that evening, as she sat by the window, watching the sun sink low behind the trees, that the full realization hit her. What if that ticket was the winning one? The thought came to Clara so suddenly that it felt like a lightning bolt striking her. She sat upright in her chair, her breath catching in her throat. She had kept those numbers in her head for so long, but now she couldn't stop thinking about them. The lottery was drawn every week, and she always watched the results on TV. But that particular Saturday evening, when she had been in the hospital, she hadn't been able to watch. She had been too weak, too upset to even consider it. But now, as the thought settled into her mind, she realized something. She had to check. Clara scrambled to find the remote control, her fingers trembling as she switched on the television. She searched through the channels, quickly finding the news station that always announced the lottery numbers. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, feeling the weight of anticipation growing inside her. The screen flickered to life, and the newsreader's calm voice filled the room. And now, for the winning numbers in this week's lottery. Clara leaned forward, her heart thudding in her chest. She had to know. She had to hear those numbers. The presenter began to read the numbers aloud. 5, 12, 23, 24, 38, 41. Clara's breath caught in her throat. It's them. It's my numbers. Her hands flew to her face in shock. It's really them. I've won. I've won the lottery. But then, in an instant, the weight of the situation came crashing down on her. She had won, yes. But that ticket, the one she had held so tightly to, the one she had bought every week for years, had been stolen. The thief had taken it, along with her purse, her sense of security, and her peace of mind. The euphoria of winning quickly turned to frustration and fear. But what do I do now? Clara thought, pacing the room. How can I prove it's mine? The ticket was stolen. It's gone. She sat back down on the couch, her mind spinning. What if I can't get it back? What if the thief claims it's his? The idea made her stomach turn. She had never imagined something like this would happen. How could she have known that her little bit of hope, her weekly ritual of buying the same ticket, would end up leading to a situation like this? Clara glanced around her small living room, the walls lined with photos of her son and her late husband. I can't just let him get away with it, she muttered under her breath. I have to fight for it. I have to get that money back. But how? She wasn't sure where to start. She hadn't even fully processed what had happened to her until now. She had been in shock, and she had tried to let it all go. But now, her mind was clear, and the idea of losing the money, of someone else taking what was rightfully hers, was unbearable. Clara stood up and walked over to the window, staring out at the quiet street. The world outside seemed unchanged, untouched by the events that had turned her life upside down. But inside her, everything had shifted. Her peaceful life was gone, and in its place, there was a determination she hadn't known she had. "I'll get that ticket back. I'll make sure I get what's mine," she whispered to herself. It was then that Clara realized that she wasn't just fighting for the money. It wasn't about the £5 million. It was about something deeper. It was about justice, about reclaiming what had been stolen from her. Not just the ticket, but her sense of safety, her peace of mind, her dignity. She wasn't going to let a thief take that from her without a fight. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The excitement of the win had faded, and now all she could think about was the lottery ticket. She had to figure out how to prove it was hers. But how? She didn't have any physical proof. There was no name on the ticket, nothing that could tie it back to her other than the numbers. The only thing she had was her memory, her connection to those numbers, and the small kiss she always made on the back of the ticket before she handed it over at the store. "I'll have to talk to a lawyer," Clara thought. "I'll have to make sure someone believes me." The next morning, Clara picked up the phone and dialed the number for a lawyer she had heard about in town, Edwin Jones. She had heard that he was good, and she didn't want to waste any time. As the phone rang, Clara's heart pounded in her chest. She was about to fight for what was rightfully hers, and though she wasn't sure what would happen, she was ready to take the first step. Chapter 9. Legal Battles Begin. The phone call with the lawyer had been short but necessary. Clara had explained her situation to Edwin Jones, a well-respected lawyer in Willowbrook, who had immediately recognized the seriousness of her case. He told her to come into his office as soon as possible. "We can sort this out, Mrs. Miller. Just come in, and we'll get the ball rolling," he had assured her. The next morning, Clara made her way to Edwin Jones's office. The morning light filtered through the trees along the street, but for Clara, everything felt heavy. Her body still ached from the attack, but it was the weight of the situation that burdened her more. She had never imagined herself in a legal battle. She had spent her entire life avoiding drama, living quietly and peacefully. Now, she was going to have to fight for something that had been taken from her, not just her money, but her sense of security. Clara arrived at Edwin Jones's office, a modest building nestled between two larger shops in the heart of town. As she entered, the scent of old books and polished wood filled the air. The receptionist, a young woman with glasses, smiled at her. "Mrs. Miller, Mr. Jones is expecting you. Please, take a seat." Clara nodded, though she didn't feel much like sitting. Her nerves were on edge. her mind still whirling with thoughts of what had happened, of the stolen lottery ticket, and the growing fear that she might not be able to prove it was hers. After a few moments, Edwin Jones appeared in the doorway of the waiting room. He was in his late 40s, wearing a crisp suit and tie with a serious but friendly expression. His eyes were kind, and as he offered his hand to Clara, she felt a flicker of hope. "Mrs. Miller, it's good to meet you," he said, his tone calm and reassuring. "Please come on in. Let's get to the bottom of this." Clara followed him into his office, a spacious room with bookshelves lining the walls. There were papers neatly stacked on his desk, a few scattered legal briefs, and a single lamp casting a warm light over the room. He gestured for Clara to sit across from him, and she did so, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. "Now, Mrs. Miller," Mr. Jones began, sitting down at his desk. "I've read through your case. You were attacked and your bag was stolen, including a lottery ticket with numbers that are significant to you, correct?" Clara nodded. "Yes, I've been buying that ticket every week for years. The numbers, they're important to me. They're connected to my family, my life. I don't care about the money as much as I care about getting that ticket back." Mr. Jones smiled gently, understanding. "I understand, Mrs. Miller, and I can see how much this means to you. But we need to be realistic here. The police are likely looking for the thief, and if they find him, he'll have the ticket. Without a name on the ticket, though, how can we prove it's yours?" Clara's heart sank. She had already considered that. She knew that the police would struggle to connect her to the ticket unless something in the evidence stood out. But her mind returned to the kiss she had always placed on the back of the ticket before handing it over at the store. It was a small, personal ritual, something only she knew about. I always put a little mark on the back of the ticket. A small kiss, you know, like a gesture of luck," Clara said quietly. "I don't know if it'll matter, but that's how I've always done it." Mr. Jones raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "A kiss, you say? Well, that could be something. If the thief kept the ticket, it might be difficult for him to explain that mark. We may have a chance here, Mrs. Miller." Clara felt a flicker of hope in her chest. "But how do we prove it? How do we get the police to believe me?" "We'll need to act quickly. First, we'll get the police involved, and then we'll check if that mark is still on the ticket. If it is, then we have a strong case." Mr. Jones leaned forward slightly. "I'll take care of the legal paperwork to officially claim the ticket as yours. We'll start by contacting the Lottery Commission and see if they've received any reports about a stolen ticket. If the thief tries to claim the money, we'll have evidence that it's yours." Clara felt the tiniest spark of hope rise within her. "Thank you, Mr. Jones. I don't want him to get away with this." "I understand," he said, standing up and offering Clara a reassuring smile. "We'll make sure that doesn't happen. I'll start working on the paperwork immediately. We'll have to move fast, but I'm confident we can get this sorted out." The next few days were a whirlwind. Mr. Jones was quick to file the necessary legal documents, making sure that Clara's claim to the ticket was officially recognized. Clara did everything she could to help with the investigation. She provided all the details she could remember about the attack, about the thief's appearance, and of course, about the ticket itself. The police were busy with their own investigation, but with the evidence Clara had provided, her description of the man, the distinctive mark on the ticket, and the fact that she had purchased the ticket regularly, they began to take the case seriously. Meanwhile, Ryan, unaware of the looming investigation, continued with his plans. He had already withdrawn part of the winnings, spending money on expensive clothes and making vague plans to move away. He had been so focused on his success that he hadn't considered the consequences of his crime. But as Clara's lawyer began to gain traction in the case, and as the police made headway in identifying the thief, Ryan's calm began to unravel. Clara's lawyer had asked for a meeting with the Lottery Commission, and soon enough, they confirmed that Ryan had indeed attempted to claim the prize. But the commission had noticed the strange absence of any identifying marks on the ticket when Ryan presented it. The small but vital detail of the kiss mark Clara had made was something only she knew about. And as the commission officials questioned Ryan about the ticket's authenticity, he began to stumble. The tension in the room was palpable. Days later, a breakthrough came. The police had finally tracked down Ryan and his whereabouts, and they had discovered enough evidence to confront him. Clara was informed that Ryan would be questioned soon. The case had officially begun to shift in Clara's favor. The legal battle wasn't over, but with each step, her belief in the justice of her claim grew stronger. She wasn't just fighting for money. She was fighting to reclaim a part of her life that had been stolen, a part of her that could never be replaced. The legal documents, the police investigation, and her own unwavering determination were all working in her favor. And as Clara sat back in her chair, waiting for the next chapter of this long and difficult journey, she knew one thing for certain. She would fight until the very end to get back what was rightfully hers. Chapter 10. The Final Showdown. The days leading up to the final showdown felt like an eternity for Clara. Every time she thought about the lottery ticket, about the money that had been rightfully hers, A deep sense of urgency would rise in her chest. But she had put her trust in Edwin Jones, her lawyer, and in the work the police were doing to uncover the truth. Her nerves were raw, her heart a constant thrum of anxiety, but her determination had never been stronger. Ryan, on the other hand, was beginning to feel the walls close in on him. His plans to claim the prize, to escape the life he had known, were starting to unravel. He had spent the last week enjoying the fruits of his success, buying new clothes, spending money he had no right to, and fantasizing about a future free from the shackles of his past. But his bravado was beginning to fade. The police had been asking questions, and they were closing in on him. The weight of his guilt began to press on him, the excitement of his winnings now overshadowed by a growing sense of dread. The final confrontation was set to take place in a courtroom. The stakes were high. Clara was ready to claim what was rightfully hers, and Ryan was determined to hold on to his ill-gotten prize. It would be a battle of wits, of evidence, and of moral righteousness. The courtroom was packed when Clara and her lawyer, Edwin Jones, walked in. Clara felt a tight knot in her stomach, but she squared her shoulders and walked with purpose. She knew this moment was coming, but she had never imagined it would be like this. Her heart was racing, her hand shaking slightly as she sat down in the witness stand. Across the room, Ryan sat with his lawyer, Sarah Lawson, a sharp, confident woman who had already made it clear that she would fight tooth and nail to keep the money. Ryan sat rigidly in his chair, his eyes darting nervously between the proceedings. He had spent the past few days racked with fear, knowing the truth would eventually catch up to him. But it was too late to turn back now. He had already been to the lottery office and tried to claim the prize. He couldn't let go of the money, even if it meant facing the consequences of his crime. The judge, a stern man in his 50s, called the court to order. "We are here today to settle the dispute regarding the lottery prize, which has been claimed by Mr. Ryan Brooks. Mrs. Clara Miller asserts that this ticket was stolen from her, and we are here to determine the rightful owner." Clara's lawyer, Mr. Jones, stood up first. He addressed the court confidently, his voice calm but firm. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Clara Miller, has provided all the evidence necessary to prove that this ticket belongs to her. She has purchased the same numbers for years. The numbers themselves, 5, 12, 23, 24, 38, 41, are significant to her personal history. They represent her birth date, her home, her son's age. This is not just about a piece of paper. It's about her life, her memories, and her rights." He paused, glancing at Ryan across the room. "And most importantly, The ticket that Mr. Brooks has tried to claim does not bear Mrs. Miller's mark. It is well known that she always marks her ticket with a small kiss, a personal ritual she has maintained for years. We have proof that this ticket does not have that mark, and that is irrefutable evidence that this is not Mrs. Miller's ticket. Clara felt a flutter of hope at the mention of the kiss mark. She had feared for so long that the thief would get away with it, but now, with her lawyer standing up for her, she felt a glimmer of confidence. It's not just about the money, she thought. It's about justice. Ryan's lawyer, Sarah Lawson, rose to her feet. She was a sharp woman, dressed impeccably in a black suit. She had been quiet up until now, but when she spoke, her voice was steady and powerful. Your Honor, we acknowledge that there is a dispute regarding the ownership of the ticket. However, my client, Mr. Ryan Brooks, came by this ticket honestly. It was found in the stolen bag, but that does not change the fact that he has legally presented it to the Lottery Commission, and the winning numbers were matched. My client deserves his prize, and there is no clear proof that Mrs. Miller is the rightful owner. Her words were smooth, calculated, and sharp. She glanced over at Clara, a slight smile playing on her lips. There is no physical evidence that proves the ticket belongs to Mrs. Miller. The kiss mark, while sentimental, is not enough to override the fact that Mr. Brooks was in possession of the ticket when he claimed the prize. My client did nothing wrong, and we have the legal right to claim what is his. Clara could feel the tension in the room mount as Sarah Lawson finished her argument. She knew that she was up against someone skilled, someone who wouldn't back down easily. But Clara wasn't going to let the truth be overlooked. I know. The ticket is mine, she whispered to herself. I've been buying these tickets every week. They're part of me. The judge, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. I understand the arguments presented by both sides. This is a complex case. However, I must consider not only the legal aspects of ownership, but also the personal history tied to this ticket. The judge paused and then turned to Ryan. Mr. Brooks, you attempted to claim a prize that you knew was not rightfully yours. We have the evidence to suggest that the ticket you presented was stolen, and without the proper identification or ownership proof from you, I am inclined to rule in favor of Mrs. Miller. Ryan's face went pale. His hands trembled slightly as he sat in his chair. He had been so sure of his victory, so confident that the prize was his. But now, the truth was catching up with him. He had stolen the ticket, and Clara had proven that it was hers. Mr. Jones turned to Clara with a reassuring nod. We've done it, Mrs. Miller. It's over. The ticket is yours. Ryan's lawyer, Sarah Lawson, tried one last-ditch effort. Your Honor, we request that you consider the possibility that Mrs. Miller's mark on the ticket is not enough to prove ownership. There is no clear, definitive evidence. Mr. Brooks had no way of knowing that the ticket had been marked. But the judge was firm. I have considered all aspects of this case. The personal connection that Mrs. Miller has to the ticket, the details provided by both parties, and the evidence presented have all led to this conclusion. The ticket belongs to Mrs. Clara Miller. Mr. Brooks, you are not entitled to the prize. Heavy silence fell over the courtroom as the judge's words hung in the air. Ryan's shoulders slumped in defeat. His dreams of a new life, his plans to run away with the prize, had been shattered in a matter of minutes. The reality of his actions finally sank in. Clara's heart pounded as she sat there listening to the judge's ruling. I won. The words felt surreal. After everything, after the attack, the fear, the uncertainty, she had won. It wasn't just the money. It was her dignity, her sense of justice, her belief that right could be done. Mr. Jones turned to her and smiled. It's over, Mrs. Miller. You've won. The ticket is yours, and the money will be transferred to you. Tears welled up in Clara's eyes as she stood up to leave the courtroom. She had fought for this moment. She had fought for what was hers, and now the world seemed a little brighter. As she walked out of the courtroom, the weight that had settled in her chest over the past few weeks began to lift. She had won, not just the lottery, but the battle for what was right. Great work today. Every moment you spend practicing brings you closer to mastering your English listening and speaking skills. Remember, progress comes with patience and consistency. If this story inspired you or helped you in your learning journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Easy English Spark channel for more lessons and stories. Keep listening, keep speaking, and keep believing in your growth. I'll see you in the next video. Take care and keep shining.